The leather chairs in Richard Morrison's law office smelled like old money and secrets. I sat in the corner, hands folded in my lap, rosary beads pressing into my calloused palms. 22 years I'd worked for the Chen family. 22 years of serving coffee in that very building when Mr. Morrison visited the mansion in Tarrytown. Now, here I was, surrounded by 5 people who looked at me like I didn't belong. Victoria Chen sat front and center, her Armani dress probably worth more than my monthly rent in East Austin. She kept glancing at her Rolex, 42 years old and already a senior partner at Kirkland & Ellis. Next to her, James Jr. tapped his phone screen, probably calculating numbers in his head. Amanda, the youngest, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. But I'd seen real grief before. This wasn't it. "Thank you all for coming," Morrison said, adjusting his reading glasses. His voice had that careful tone lawyers use when they know things are about to get real. Robert Chen's last will and testament was updated 6 months before he passed away at age 68. $47 million. That's what everyone in that room was thinking about. I could feel their expectations crackling in the air like static before a Texas thunderstorm. Robert had built his real estate empire from nothing, or so they thought. The truth was so much more complicated. Morrison cleared his throat. "To my children, Victoria, James, and Amanda, I leave my properties in Westlake Hills, my investment portfolio with Fidelity, and equal shares of Chen Development Corporation." Victoria's shoulders relaxed slightly. James stopped fidgeting. Amanda smiled through her fake tears. Then Morrison said the words that shattered everything. "To Maria Elena Soto, who has served my household with unwavering loyalty for 22 years, I leave the sum of $15 million transferred from my personal account at Wells Fargo, along with the deed to her current residence and full ownership of the property in East Austin." The silence was deafening. I felt 5 pairs of eyes turn toward me like searchlights. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my expression calm. Robert had taught me that. How to keep your face neutral when your heart was breaking or racing. Right now, it was doing both. "I'm sorry. What?" Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife through butter. 15 million? To the housekeeper? The way she said it. Housekeeper. Like I was something she'd scraped off her designer shoes. I'd cleaned her childhood bedroom, packed her lunches for school, listened to her cry about her first heartbreak. But, in that moment, I was just the help who'd somehow cheated her out of what she thought was rightfully hers. Morrison continued, his voice steady. "The transfer is legitimate and irrevocable. Mr. Chen also left a sealed envelope, marked to be opened only if the will is contested. There's mention of an agreement dated 2003 and documents stored in a security deposit box." "This is insane." James finally spoke up, his face flushed red. "Dad was manipulated. He was sick those last few months. Your father was of sound mind when this will was prepared," Morrison interrupted. "I have the medical evaluations to prove it. 2 independent doctors certified his mental capacity. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to tell them they didn't understand anything about their own father. But Robert's voice echoed in my memory from one of our late-night conversations in his study. "Sometimes silence is the strongest response, Maria. Let them show who they really are." So I stayed quiet. I watched Victoria's jaw clench, watched her mentally planning her next move. She was already thinking about legal contestation. I could see it in her eyes. That same calculating look Robert used to get when he was negotiating a deal. Like father, like daughter, except Robert had honor underneath the calculation. "There's a 90-day window for any legal challenges," Morrison continued, gathering his papers. "I suggest you all take time to process this information before making any decisions." As everyone stood to leave, Victoria turned to me directly for the first time. "We're not done here. Whatever you did to convince my father to do this, it won't stand up in court." I met her gaze steadily. "Your father was a good man. Better than any of you knew." "Save it," James muttered, brushing past me toward the door. Amanda lingered for a moment, her eyes searching my face for something. Guilt, maybe, or triumph. She wouldn't find either. What she'd find, if she looked close enough, was the same thing I'd carried for 22 years. The weight of protecting a truth too dangerous to speak. But what none of them knew, sitting in that expensive office in downtown Austin, was that the $15 million was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would transform everything they believed about Robert Chen, was still locked away, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment was coming, faster than they realized. That night, I sat alone in the small house Robert bought me back in 2010, a modest two-bedroom on Rosewood Avenue in East Austin. The neighborhood had changed so much since then. Gentrification brought fancy coffee shops and boutique stores, but the heart of the community remained the same. My neighbors still knew my name, still waved from their porches. I made myself a cup of Mexican coffee, the kind Robert loved. Dark roast with cinnamon and piloncillo, the way my grandmother taught me in Oaxaca. The smell filled my tiny kitchen and pulled me back 22 years, to the day everything changed. May 2003. I was 36 years old when I arrived in Austin with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and a recommendation letter from Father Miguel. The American dream. That's what everyone back home called it. Send money back, build a better life, maybe one day bring the family north. I'd left my two sisters and my aging mother behind, promising to return for Christmas. That was the plan. The Chen Mansion in Tarrytown took my breath away that first morning. 3 stories of limestone and glass, overlooking Lake Austin. Helen Chen interviewed me in the sunroom. Cold, efficient, checking references like she was hiring a corporate executive instead of domestic help. I got the job because I spoke English better than the other candidates and because I didn't ask questions. But it was Robert who made me stay. The first time we really talked, he found me crying in the kitchen at midnight. I just learned my mother needed surgery. $3,000 we didn't have. I was on the phone with my sister, trying to figure out how to send more money when my paycheck barely covered rent. "How much do you need?" he'd asked quietly, startling me. I tried to explain it wasn't his problem, but he'd already pulled out his checkbook. "Consider it an advance. You'll work it off over time." Except he never mentioned it again. Not once in 22 years. That's who Robert Chen was when nobody was watching. Over the years, we developed a rhythm. I'd arrive at 6 in the morning, start the coffee, always that special Mexican blend I'd taught him to appreciate. He'd come down around 7, and we'd talk. In Spanish, mostly. Helen and the kids never bothered learning, so our conversations became this secret language of shared stories. He taught me about American history, helped me study for my citizenship test in 2008. I taught him to play my guitar, old Mexican ballads that reminded him of his own immigrant parents from Taiwan. On Thanksgiving, I'd make tamales alongside the traditional turkey. The family tolerated it, but Robert, he'd sneak into the kitchen for seconds, thirds, telling me stories about his mother's cooking from his childhood. The neighbors in Tarrytown noticed. Of course they did. Rich white ladies at garden parties, whispering behind their wine glasses. "He spends an awful lot of time talking to the help." Helen noticed, too. I'd catch her watching us sometimes, her lips pressed into a thin line. But she never said anything. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe she just didn't care enough to interfere. After Helen passed away in 2015, breast cancer that took her in 8 brutal months, things shifted. Robert became quieter, more reflective. He started writing things down, locking papers in his study. Sometimes I'd find him staring at old photographs, his expression heavy with regrets I couldn't name. "Maria," he told me one evening in 2017, "if anything happens to me, there are things my children need to know. But not yet. They're not ready yet." I didn't understand then. I do now. Last week, going through the boxes Robert had left in my garage, boxes he'd moved there 3 years ago, I found the photo album, the one he'd hidden. Page after page of pictures the family had never seen. Robert in military uniform, 1978. Robert shaking hands with politicians at construction sites. Robert standing next to a young woman with kind eyes and my family's distinctive features, my cousin Lupita, who disappeared in 1982. And documents. So many documents. One folder labeled Confidential Agreement, 2003, with my name on it. Inside, a contract I'd never signed but Robert had notarized anyway. Legal protection, he'd called it. Insurance policy, he'd written in the margins, for when they come looking. Another folder marked Estate Planning, Final Instructions. Papers referencing something called permanent legal protection and disclosure protocols. Words that made my hands shake as I read them. And then I found it. The envelope. Heavy, cream-colored paper, sealed with red wax bearing Robert's initials, written across the front in his precise handwriting. To be opened only if my will is contested. Maria, you'll know when the time is right. I sat on my living room floor, guitar leaning against the wall where Robert had last played it, and that envelope burning in my hands like a live coal. Victoria's threat from this afternoon echoed in my mind. We're not done here. The time was coming, maybe sooner than I'd hoped. I placed the envelope on my kitchen table, next to the photo of Robert and me at my citizenship ceremony in 2008. He'd taken the day off work to be there. His own children hadn't even known about it. I promised to protect your secret, I whispered to his photograph, but they're going to force my hand. And when they did, everything the Chen family believed about their father would crumble. 3 days after the reading of the will, my phone started buzzing with messages I didn't understand. Screenshots, links, Facebook posts spreading through Austin like wildfire. Amanda Chen had posted from the mansion. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who betray you. My father was a generous man who gave someone a chance at a better life. In his final years, when he was vulnerable and grieving my mother, that generosity was exploited. Our family is heartbroken but will fight for justice. 847 comments in 6 hours. Most of them calling me names I won't repeat. Some suggesting I should be deported, others claiming they'd always known something was off about the Mexican housekeeper getting too close to the wealthy widower. People I'd never met, making up stories about my life, my character, my intentions. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the hatred. This was coordinated, calculated. The Chen children weren't just angry, they were executing a strategy. I found out how deep it went when Rosa Martinez, my friend from St. Ignatius Parish, called that evening. Maria, I need to tell you something. Victoria Chen's people contacted Father Thomas. They're asking questions about you. About your immigration status, your background, whether you've ever been in trouble. What kind of questions? The kind lawyers ask when they're building a case. Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. They're trying to destroy your reputation before this goes to court. That night I couldn't sleep. I drove to the mansion in Tarrytown, the place that had been my second home for 22 years. Robert had left it to the children naturally, but I still had my key. Nobody had thought to ask for it back yet. The house was dark, but I let myself in through the kitchen entrance. Everything looked the same, but felt hollow. The walls held 22 years of memories. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, quiet mornings making coffee. Now it felt like a museum to a family that had never really existed. I walked through the rooms, touching familiar surfaces. Robert's favorite reading chair by the fireplace. The piano nobody played except during Christmas. The framed photos on the mantel, perfect family portraits that never showed the distance between them, the words left unsaid, the resentments simmering beneath polished smiles. In Robert's study, I paused. This was where we'd had our deepest conversations, where he'd helped me study for my citizenship test, where he'd taught me about American history and the Constitution, where he'd told me, over and over, this country was built by people brave enough to start over. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. On his desk, I noticed something strange. A military photograph from 1978, Robert in uniform, young and serious, that usually sat in the drawer was now prominently displayed. Had the children been looking through his things? What else had they found? My phone rang, making me jump. Unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code. I almost didn't answer. Miss Soto. A man's voice, older, careful. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a retired FBI agent. I knew Robert Chen in 1979. We need to talk. My heart hammered against my ribs. How did you get my number? I've been watching the news out of Austin. The social media campaign against you. Very convenient timing, very coordinated. He paused. Ms. Soto, Robert's children don't know what they're really fighting over, but I do. And if they push this into court, they're going to uncover something that will destroy more than just their father's reputation. What are you talking about? Not over the phone, but I need you to know. You're not alone in this. Robert protected a secret for 46 years. A secret that involves people far more dangerous than his spoiled children. If they keep digging, if they bring investigators into this, things are going to get complicated fast. Who are you, really? Someone who's been waiting a very long time to see justice done. Check your mailbox tomorrow morning. I'm sending you something that will help you understand what Robert was protecting. And Ms. Soto, don't open that sealed envelope yet. Not until you've read what I'm sending you first. The line went dead. I stood in Robert's study, phone clutched in my shaking hand, surrounded by the ghosts of 22 years. Somewhere in this house, Robert had hidden pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. A puzzle that involved FBI agents and secrets dating back to 1979. A puzzle that his children were about to stumble into like bulls in a china shop. I thought about Victoria and her high-powered lawyers at Kirkland & Ellis, about James and his financial calculations, about Amanda and her social media campaign. They thought they were fighting over $15 million and wounded pride. They had no idea what was really at stake. As I locked the mansion door behind me and walked to my car, I noticed a black sedan parked 3 houses down. Just sitting there, watching. Robert's words from years ago echoed in my mind. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is uncover the truth. Sometimes silence protects everyone. But sometimes, Maria, silence becomes its own kind of betrayal. The time for silence was running out. The package arrived at 6:47 a.m. before the Texas sun turned my small porch into an oven. No return address. Just a plain manila envelope with my name written in careful block letters. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. The note read, Ms. Soto. This key opens the storage unit Robert rented in 2003. Unit 247 at Austin Self-Storage on East 7th Street. He paid 20 years in advance. The cassette tapes inside will explain everything. Listen to them before you make any decisions. The Chen children are 72 hours away from filing their contestation. Once they do, you'll need to act fast. M.W. My coffee went cold as I stared at that key. 20 years. Robert had been planning this since 2003. The same year I arrived in Austin. The same year that mysterious confidential agreement was dated. I called in sick to my Thursday cleaning jobs and drove to the storage facility. The place was run down, tucked between a taqueria and an auto shop in East Austin. Not the kind of location a millionaire would typically choose, but that was exactly the point. Nobody from Tarrytown would ever look here. Unit 247 was at the back, small and climate-controlled. The key turned smoothly like it had been used recently. Inside, I found a metal file box and an old cassette player, the kind Robert used to have in his study before everything went digital. 6 tapes, each labeled in Robert's handwriting. Truth for Maria, 1979. Truth for Maria, 1982. Truth for Maria, 2003. Truth for Maria, 2015. Truth for Maria, 2023. And finally, Final Instructions, 2025. My hands shook as I loaded the first tape. Robert's voice filled the small space, and for a moment I forgot he was gone. Maria, if you're hearing this, it means I've passed on. And it means my children have done exactly what I feared they'd do. They've challenged my will. They think this is about money. They think you manipulated a lonely old man. They couldn't be more wrong. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. His voice sounded younger on this recording, stronger. I need to tell you a story that began long before you came into my life. November 1979. I was 22 years old, fresh out of the Army, working construction to save money for college. My family had immigrated from Taiwan 5 years earlier. We had green cards, but they were tied to my father's employer, a company owned by the Donovan family. Arthur Donovan Sr. ran half of Austin's commercial real estate back then. Still does, through his sons. I pressed pause, my mind racing. The Donovans. I'd heard that name before, seen it on buildings downtown, on donation plaques at the hospital. Old Austin money, the kind of family that could make problems disappear. I hit play again. I was working on a shopping center project in South Austin. One night, I stayed late to finish paperwork. That's when I saw Arthur Donovan Sr. meet with County Commissioner William Bradford in the construction trailer. I watched Donovan hand Bradford an envelope, thick, bulging with cash. $500,000, I later learned, in exchange for rezoning approvals and building permits that should never have been issued. Robert's voice grew heavier. I took photos. I was young and stupid and thought I could report it to the authorities. But Donovan found out. He came to my family's apartment in North Austin and threatened us. Said if I spoke one word, he'd have my father deported, our green cards revoked. Said he'd ruin us. And I believed him, Maria. I believed him because I'd seen what he did to others who crossed him. The tape clicked as it turned. So I stayed silent. I buried those photos, kept my head down, and built my own real estate company. I became successful, married Helen, had 3 children. But that silence ate at me for 24 years. Every building I saw with the Donovan name on it reminded me of my cowardice. Every time I looked at my American citizenship certificate, I felt like a fraud. I wiped my eyes, understanding beginning to dawn. Then you came into my life in 2003, and 6 months later, I learned that the Donovans were using the same tactics in Mexico, buying land through intimidation, forcing families off their property. Your cousin Lupita had land in Oaxaca they wanted. When she refused to sell, she disappeared. My breath caught. Lupita, my beautiful cousin who vanished without a trace in 2003. The family had always suspected foul play, but we had no proof, no resources to investigate. I still had those photos from 1979, Maria. I still had the evidence. So I made a deal with Arthur Donovan Jr. I'd continue keeping my silence about his father's crimes if he left your family alone, if he protected your cousin's land, if he guaranteed your safety in America. The tape hissed in the silence. The $15 million isn't a gift, Maria. It's reparation. For 24 years of my cowardice. For the price your family paid because powerful men think they're above justice. You earned every cent just by surviving in a world that tried to crush you. The tape clicked off. I sat in that storage unit, surrounded by the truth Robert had carried alone for 46 years, and finally understood. This wasn't about an inheritance. It was about justice delayed but not forgotten. And his children were about to stumble into something far more dangerous than they could imagine. I listened to all 6 tapes twice before my phone rang again. Marcus Webb. This time, I answered on the first ring. You found the storage unit. It wasn't a question. I found it. I heard everything. My voice cracked slightly. Lupita, my cousin. Robert knew what happened to her. He knew, and he did the only thing he could do to protect your family. But Miss Soto, we have a serious problem. The Donovans monitor obituaries. They know Robert passed away, and they know Victoria Chen is hiring investigators to contest the will. I felt cold despite the Texas heat. What does that mean? It means they're cleaning house. Yesterday, 3 boxes of county clerk records from 1979 mysteriously went missing during a routine archive transfer. Building permits, zoning documents, all gone. They're erasing evidence, and they're moving fast. But you said you were FBI. Don't you have copies? I was a junior investigator in 1979. I made unofficial copies of some files before the case was buried, but they're not admissible in court without corroborating evidence. We need the original documentation Robert stored, and we need the witness who can verify what he saw. What witness? Webb's voice dropped lower. The last tape. Did you listen to tape 6? I hadn't. I'd been too overwhelmed after tape 4. With shaking hands, I loaded the final cassette. Robert's voice, recorded just months before he passed away, filled the storage unit. Maria, there's one more person who knows the truth. Eleanor Hartman. She was Arthur Donovan Sr.'s secretary in 1979. She saw everything I saw. In 2003, when I made my deal with the Donovans to protect your family, Eleanor and I opened a joint safety deposit box at Wells Fargo. Box 247. Same number as this storage unit. It requires both our signatures to access. Everything is in there. Photos, documents, her testimony. Eleanor is in her late 70s now, living at Sunrise Senior Care on North Lamar. If my children contest the will, you'll need her help. Webb was talking again. I've already confirmed Eleanor is still there, But Miss Soto, she has early-stage Alzheimer's. Some days she's sharp as ever. Other days she doesn't remember her own children. We have 72 hours before Victoria files her legal motion. Once that happens, the Donovans will know for certain that someone's digging into the past. They'll move Eleanor somewhere we can't reach her. How do you know all this? Because I've spent 46 years watching the Donovan family operate above the law. I became an FBI agent because of what I couldn't investigate in 1979. I've been waiting for this moment since I retired 3 years ago. 2 hours later, I met Marcus Webb in Zilker Park. He looked exactly like his voice. Late 60s, gray hair cut military short, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore jeans and a University of Texas polo shirt, blending in with the early morning joggers and dog walkers. "Thank you for trusting me," he said, sitting on a bench overlooking the soccer fields. "Do I have a choice?" He smiled grimly. "Not really. But for what it's worth, Robert Chen was one of the bravest men I never got to properly meet. He lived with that secret for decades, and he structured everything so the truth would come out at exactly the right moment." Webb handed me a folder. Inside were photocopied FBI reports from 1979, photographs of Arthur Donovan Sr., detailed notes about the corruption case that never went anywhere. Eleanor Hartman worked for Donovan for 30 years. She retired in 2009 with a generous pension. Hush money, basically, but she's a woman of conscience. She agreed to help Robert create an insurance policy. If anything happened to him, if the truth ever needed to come out, she'd verify everything. And you think she'll help me? I think you're the only person she'll help. Eleanor's son died in Iraq. Her daughter moved to California and never visits. She's lonely, forgotten, warehoused in a facility where nobody really sees her. But you understand what it means to be invisible in a world that doesn't value people like us. That afternoon, I walked into Sunrise Senior Care carrying a container of homemade tamales. The nurse at the desk looked suspicious until I explained I was visiting Eleanor Hartman, an old friend of my former employer. Eleanor sat in the common room, staring out the window. 79 years old, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly. When I sat beside her and opened the container, the smell of corn masa and homemade salsa filled the air. "My name is Maria Soto," I said gently. "Robert Chen sent me." Her eyes focused suddenly, sharp and clear. "Robert, is he? He passed away 3 weeks ago. But before he did, he told me about 1979, about what you both witnessed, about your courage." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "I thought everyone forgot. I thought it didn't matter anymore. It matters. It always mattered. And now we need your help to make sure the truth finally comes out." She reached for my hand, gripping it with surprising strength. "What do you need me to do?" Just then, my phone buzzed. Text from Webb. "Problem. James Chen Jr. just called Sunrise Senior Care asking about recent visitors to his aunt Eleanor. They're on to us. You need to move now. 20 minutes. That's all the head start we had." I helped Eleanor to her feet, moving as naturally as I could while my heart hammered against my ribs. The nurse at the front desk was on the phone, distracted. We walked out the front door like we were just going for a stroll in the garden. Webb was waiting in his silver Honda Civic at the corner. Eleanor moved slower than I'd hoped, but her mind was laser-focused now. "I've been waiting 20 years for this," she said as we helped her into the back seat. "I'm not letting James Chen or anyone else stop us now." The Wells Fargo branch on Congress Avenue looked like every other bank. Glass doors, marble floors, the smell of air conditioning and printed money. But inside Safety Deposit Box 247 was evidence that could bring down one of Austin's most powerful families. The bank manager, a young woman named Jessica Rodriguez, seemed skeptical when Eleanor and I presented ourselves at her desk. "You're requesting access to a box opened in 2003. That's over 20 years ago. I'll need to verify." "I have the key," I said, sliding it across her desk, "and Mrs. Hartman has her identification. Robert Chen passed away 3 weeks ago. He left instructions that we should access this box together." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard. Minutes ticked by. I kept glancing at the door, expecting Victoria's lawyers to burst through any second. "The account is paid through 2028, Jessica finally said. "But there's a note here. It says, access requires both signatures and there's a security question that must be answered correctly." My stomach dropped. What question? Jessica turned her monitor toward us. On the screen, Robert's own words. What was the name of Maria's cousin, who deserved justice? My eyes burned with tears. Even in death, Robert was protecting this information. Only someone who truly knew the story would know the answer. Lupita, I whispered. Her name was Lupita Soto. Jessica typed it in. A green check mark appeared. Right this way. The vault room was cold and quiet. Jessica retrieved the long metal box and placed it on the table in the private viewing room. Eleanor's hand shook as she signed the access log. Then it was my turn. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside, I found a world of carefully preserved evidence. Photographs in protective sleeves, Arthur Donovan Sr. handing an envelope to County Commissioner Bradford, time-stamped November 14, 1979, 11:47 p.m. The clarity was remarkable for cameras of that era. Robert had used professional equipment, captured multiple angles, 47 pages of documentation, contracts with forged signatures, building permits that should never have been approved, bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, numbers, dates, amounts. 15 witnesses were named in the documents. 8 had passed away over the years, but 7 were still alive. Then I found the birth certificate. David Michael Soto, born March 15, 1982, in El Paso, Texas. Mother, Lupita Maria Soto. Father, unknown. My hands froze. David, the carpenter from East Austin who I knew from St. Ignatius Parish, the kind young man who'd helped me fix my fence last summer, who always asked about my family in Mexico with genuine interest. He was Lupita's son, my cousin's child. Oh my God! Eleanor breathed beside me. Robert never told me about the boy. There was more. A letter in Robert's handwriting dated 2015. To whom it may concern, in 1982, Lupita Soto was forced to leave Texas due to threats from Donovan Construction regarding land her family owned in Oaxaca, Mexico. She was pregnant with my child, the result of a brief relationship during a time when I was separated from my wife. Lupita returned to Mexico, gave birth, and left her son with family in El Paso before disappearing. I have reason to believe the Donovans were responsible for her disappearance. I have provided for David Soto financially through anonymous trusts, but I could never acknowledge him publicly without putting him in danger. The $15 million left to Maria Soto is intended as a trust fund for David, my biological son and rightful heir. The room spun. Everything made sense now. The special attention Robert paid to David at church events. The coincidental construction jobs that always came David's way. The scholarship that appeared out of nowhere when David wanted to study architecture. Robert had been protecting his son from the shadows for 43 years. Eleanor gripped my arm. Do you understand what this means? If Victoria contests the will and this information comes out, David has legal claim to 50% of Robert's entire estate. Not just the $15 million. Everything. At the bottom of the box, sealed in plastic, was a DNA test. Robert Chen. Father. David Soto. Son. 99.9% probability. Processed at a private lab in Houston. Dated August 2015. My phone buzzed. Webb. Victoria's lawyers just filed an emergency motion. They're requesting a preliminary hearing in 48 hours. They want to freeze all assets pending investigation. It's happening, Maria. Are you ready? I looked at the evidence spread before me. 46 years of secrets, sacrifice, and silence. Robert had orchestrated everything perfectly. His greedy children would contest the will, and in doing so, they would trigger the revelation of a truth that would reshape their entire family. Justice was coming. Not the kind anyone expected, but the kind Robert had planned all along. I couldn't sleep that night. The birth certificate sat on my kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. David Soto, the gentle carpenter who helped elderly neighbors fix their roofs, who volunteered at the parish food bank, who had no idea his father was one of Austin's most successful real estate developers. At 3 a.m, I found myself at St. Ignatius Parish. Father Thomas had given me a key years ago for early morning cleaning. Now I sat in the empty sanctuary, surrounded by flickering votive candles, trying to pray my way through an impossible decision. Tell David the truth and give him the inheritance he deserved, but also shatter his understanding of his own identity and expose him to the same dangers that had forced Robert to hide him for 43 years, or protect him through continued silence, honoring Robert's decades of secrecy, but denying David his birthright and his story. "Robert," I whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what to do." By Friday morning, Victoria's social media campaign had reached new heights. The Austin American-Statesman ran a story. "Wealthy developer's will sparks family dispute." The comment section exploded with opinions from people who knew nothing about Robert, about me, about the truth buried beneath 22 years of loyalty. Gold digger, they called me. Manipulator. Someone started a Change.org petition demanding an investigation into elder abuse of Robert Chen. It had 2,147 signatures by noon. Rosa called, her voice tight with worry. "Maria, people are talking at the parish. Some are defending you, but others—" She trailed off. "Father Thomas wants to hold a community meeting. He thinks it will help." It wouldn't. Not yet. But I appreciated the gesture. That afternoon, I saw David at the hardware store on East Cesar Chavez. He was buying lumber for a deck restoration in Bolden Creek, discussing wood grain with the clerk like it was the most important conversation in the world. That was David. Fully present, genuinely interested in craftsmanship, humble despite his talent. "Miss Maria," he grinned when he saw me. That warm smile that I now realized came straight from Robert. Same eyes, same tilt of the head when he listened. How had I never seen it before? "How are you holding up?" he asked, his expression shifting to concern. "I saw the news. People are saying terrible things. It's not right. You don't believe them. I believe you cared for Mr. Chen better than his own family did. I saw you at his funeral. That wasn't fake grief, Miss Maria. That was real." My throat tightened. "David, if you could know something about your father, your biological father, would you want to know, even if it complicated everything?" His expression turned thoughtful. "I've wondered about him my whole life. My mom left me with my grandparents in El Paso when I was 6 months old. They said she had to go away, that it wasn't safe. She was coming back for me, but she never did." His voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes I imagine he looked for me, that maybe he cared but couldn't find me. Other times I think he just didn't want me. What if he did want you? What if he protected you the only way he knew how?" David studied my face carefully. "Ms. Maria, do you know something about my father?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Marcus Webb. Victoria's lawyers accelerated their timeline. "Emergency hearing is Monday morning, 9 a.m., Travis County Courthouse. Judge Martha Rodriguez presiding. They're bringing in forensic accountants, challenging Robert's mental capacity, the whole package. And Maria, the Donovan family just hired representation. They're watching this case very carefully." My decision crystallized in that moment. Robert had built a house of cards designed to fall at exactly the right moment. Victoria's greed would be the wind that toppled it. "David," I said, slipping my phone back into my purse, "I need you to come to my house tonight. There's something I have to show you, something about Robert Chen, and something about your father. Are they connected? They're the same person." I watched the color drain from his face, watched understanding dawn slowly, like sunrise breaking over the Austin skyline. 43 years of questions answered in 4 words. My father was Robert Chen. Your father was Robert Chen. And he loved you more than you'll ever know. But to protect you, he had to love you from a distance. Come tonight, 7 o'clock, I'll show you everything. That evening, I laid out the evidence on my dining room table. The birth certificate, the DNA test, the photographs of Robert at David's school events, always in the background, always watching, the anonymous scholarship letters, the trust fund statements that David never knew existed. He cried. We both did. "All those times at church," David whispered, "when he'd ask me about my work, about my life, he was checking on me. He was so proud of you. Every time you helped someone, every house you restored with care, he knew. He was always watching, always protecting. Why didn't he tell me? Because the people who threatened your mother, who made her disappear, they're still powerful. They're still dangerous. And Robert knew that acknowledging you publicly would paint a target on your back. David looked at the evidence spread before us. The proof of a father's love expressed through decades of strategic silence. What happens now? Now, I said, we finish what your father started. Monday morning, we walk into that courthouse, and we tell the truth. Monday morning arrived with the weight of 46 years pressing down on my shoulders. I dressed in my best outfit, a simple navy dress Rosa had helped me pick out, modest but dignified. David wore the suit he'd bought for job interviews, his hands shaking as he knotted his tie. Marcus Webb met us on the courthouse steps at 8:30 a.m. Eleanor's already inside. She's having a good day. Sharp, focused, ready to testify if needed. The Donovan lawyers are here too. 3 of them from Baker Botts. They smell blood in the water. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Judge Martha Rodriguez, a stern woman in her early 60s, sat behind the bench reviewing documents. Victoria and her siblings occupied the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, Martin Fisher from Kirkland & Ellis. Expensive suit, practiced confidence, the kind of attorney who'd never lost a case he cared about winning. Victoria's eyes locked onto me as I entered. Then she noticed David beside me, and confusion flickered across her face. "Who's that?" she hissed to her lawyer. We sat in the gallery, waiting. Webb had advised us to let Victoria make her case first. "Let her dig her own grave," he'd said. "Then we bury her in it." Fisher stood, theatrical and polished. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Robert Chen, in his final years, was a grieving widower who became emotionally dependent on his domestic employee. The evidence will show systematic manipulation, undue influence, and exploitation of a vulnerable man's loneliness. $15 million is not gratitude, it's theft disguised as a bequest." He presented his evidence. Testimony from neighbors about inappropriate closeness. Financial records showing the house Robert bought me in 2010. Photographs of Robert and me at my citizenship ceremony, which Fisher framed as evidence of boundary violations. Victoria took the stand, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "My father changed after my mother passed away. He became isolated, dependent on Ms. Soto for everything. She was always there, always influencing his decisions. We believe she manipulated him into changing his will." Judge Rodriguez listened impassively. "Ms. Chen, did your father show signs of dementia or diminished capacity?" "He was grieving, vulnerable, not thinking clearly." "That's not what I asked. Did he have a medical diagnosis indicating cognitive impairment?" Victoria hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but—" "Thank you. You may step down." Fisher called 2 more witnesses, a handwriting expert questioning signatures on documents, a psychologist who'd never met Robert but testified about elder manipulation patterns. It was theatrical, professional, and completely predictable. Then it was our turn. Morrison, who'd been sitting quietly as executor of the estate, stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present evidence that fundamentally alters the nature of this case." He nodded to me. I walked forward, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "Your Honor, my name is Maria Elena Soto. For 22 years, I worked for Robert Chen. But this case isn't about manipulation or theft. It's about justice delayed for 46 years. I presented the cassette tapes, the transcripts, the evidence from Safety Deposit Box 247. Eleanor Hartman came forward, her testimony clear and devastating. She described the corruption she'd witnessed in 1979, the threats Robert faced, the deal he'd made with the Donovans in 2003 to protect my family. The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the gallery started typing furiously. The Donovan lawyers requested an immediate recess, which Judge Rodriguez denied. Then I played my final card. "Your Honor, there's one more thing the court needs to know. The $15 million was never meant for me. It was meant as a trust fund for Robert Chen's biological son, David Soto, who is present in this courtroom today." Victoria's face went white. James dropped his phone. Amanda gasped audibly. David stood, walking forward with quiet dignity. I handed Judge Rodriguez the birth certificate and DNA test. Robert Chen had a son in 1982 with my cousin, Lupita Soto, I continued. He couldn't acknowledge David publicly without endangering him, so he protected him from the shadows for 43 years. The will Victoria is contesting includes a clause that if challenged, David would be revealed as a rightful heir with claim to 50% of the entire estate. Fisher was on his feet. Your Honor, this is documented and verified, Judge Rodriguez interrupted, reviewing the DNA evidence. Continue, Miss Soto. Robert Chen structured his will to guarantee that his children's greed would expose their own hypocrisy. He knew Victoria would contest it. He knew they'd reveal their true characters. And he knew that when the truth came out, David would finally get the recognition he deserved. Marcus Webb stood from the gallery. Your Honor, the FBI has reopened its investigation into corruption charges from 1979 based on this evidence. The Donovan family is currently under federal investigation. The Donovan lawyers were already packing their briefcases, rushing toward the exit. Judge Rodriguez removed her glasses, studying the courtroom with barely concealed satisfaction. This case is far more complex than a simple will dispute. I'm ordering a full review of all evidence and scheduling a formal hearing for next month. In the meantime, all assets remain frozen, and Mr. David Soto is hereby recognized as a potential heir pending genetic verification. Victoria's perfect facade cracked. She was crying now. Real tears, finally. Not of grief, but of the devastating realization that her father had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave. The story exploded across Texas like wildfire in drought season. Austin, real estate magnate's secret son. Revealed in will dispute. FBI reopens 1979. Corruption case against Donovan Construction. Chen family will battle exposes decades of hidden truth. I watched it unfold from my living room in East Austin, David sitting beside me in stunned silence. 43 years of secrets, unraveled in one morning. Within 24 hours, Judge Rodriguez issued her formal ruling. The will was valid. David was confirmed through DNA testing as Robert's biological son and legal heir. Victoria's contestation was denied, with the judge noting clear evidence of testamentary capacity and explicit instructions regarding conditional inheritance clauses. But the legal victory was just the beginning. Victoria lost more than money. The Texas State Bar opened an ethics investigation into her conduct, specifically the coordinated social media campaign she'd orchestrated to destroy my reputation before the trial. Conduct unbecoming an attorney, the complaint read. Her license was suspended pending review. Kirkland and Ellis quietly asked her to take a leave of absence. James faced his own consequences. The IRS, alerted by irregularities in the financial documents he'd submitted to contest the will, launched an audit of his personal accounts. Turned out he'd been hiding income in offshore accounts for years, likely learned from his father's old documents, ironically. The audit turned into a criminal investigation within a week. Amanda, the youngest, made a different choice. She published a public apology on Facebook. I was wrong about Maria Soto. I was wrong about my father. I let grief and greed blind me to the truth. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, and I'm trying to learn from this mistake. The comments were mixed, but it was a start. The Donovan family's fall was even more spectacular. Marcus Webb's FBI investigation moved with startling speed. Within 3 days, federal agents raided Donovan Construction headquarters, seizing 40 years of financial records. The evidence Robert and Eleanor had preserved became the foundation for a massive RICO case. Arthur Donovan Jr., now 72 years old, was indicted on corruption charges, money laundering, and conspiracy. His son, Arthur Donovan III, faced similar charges. The construction empire that had dominated Austin since the 1960s began to crumble. But the most shocking revelation came from the county archives. Investigators discovered that County Commissioner William Bradford, the man who'd accepted that envelope in 1979, was still alive at 81 years old, living comfortably in Westlake Hills on a government pension. Footage from the local news showed federal agents escorting him out of his home in handcuffs. Justice delayed is not justice denied, Marcus Webb said in a press conference outside the FBI field office. This case proves that truth has a long memory. The community response split along familiar lines, then slowly shifted. Initially, East Austin rallied around me immediately. My neighbors, my church, the immigrant community that understood what it meant to be accused and disbelieved. But Tarrytown, Westlake Hills, the wealthy neighborhoods where Robert had lived, they were slower to come around. Until Eleanor Hartman gave an interview to the Austin American Statesman. "Robert Chen was the most honorable man I ever knew," she said, sitting in her room at Sunrise Senior Care. "He sacrificed his own peace of mind to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Maria Soto didn't manipulate him. She honored his wishes when nobody else would. And David Soto is his father's son in all the ways that matter." The article went viral. Within days, the narrative shifted from "housekeeper manipulates employer" to "son finds father's legacy of justice." My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Interview requests, book deals, a producer from Netflix asking about documentary rights. I turned them all down. This wasn't my story to sell. It was David's story to discover, and Robert's story to finally complete. 6 weeks after the courthouse revelation, David and I visited Robert's grave at Austin Memorial Park. Someone, Victoria maybe, or Amanda, had left fresh flowers. A small gesture, but meaningful. "I talked to Amanda yesterday," David said quietly. "She wants to meet. Says she wants to get to know her brother, if I'm willing. Are you? I don't know yet. She hurt you. She hurt a lot of people." He paused, tracing Robert's name on the headstone. "But Dad, Robert, he knew about forgiveness. He forgave himself for staying silent in 1979. He forgave the Donovans enough to make a deal instead of destroying them immediately. Maybe that's part of his legacy, too." I thought about Robert's voice on those cassette tapes. The weight he'd carried. The courage it took to finally plan for truth instead of continued silence. "Your father would be proud of you," I said. "Not because of who you're related to, but because of who you are. That's what he always wanted you to know." David smiled. That same warm smile Robert used to give me over morning coffee. "Thanks to you, Miss Maria, I finally get to know him, even if it's through stories and evidence and memories. It's more than I ever hoped for." Justice had come in cascading waves. Legal, personal, systemic. The dominoes Robert had carefully arranged 46 years ago had finally fallen exactly as he'd planned. The Robert Chen Foundation for Immigrant Justice opened its doors on a warm May morning in East Austin, 6 months after that courthouse revelation changed everything. The building itself was modest, a renovated warehouse on East Cesar Chavez, painted bright white with blue trim. David had designed the renovations himself, incorporating elements from Robert's architectural philosophy. Spaces should welcome people, not intimidate them. Inside, the walls displayed photographs from Robert's life, not the official portraits from corporate headquarters, but the real moments. Robert at my citizenship ceremony, his proud smile barely contained. Robert shaking hands with a young David at a church fundraiser, neither knowing then what they were to each other. Robert and Helen in their early years, before distance crept into their marriage. The foundation's mission was specific: provide legal assistance, financial support, and advocacy for immigrant families facing exploitation or corruption. The $15 million had become seed funding for something that would outlive all of us. "We're opening with 47 families on our assistance list," David told the crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. 47. One for each million in my father's estate. Each family facing challenges similar to what my mother's family faced in 2003, each deserving the protection my father wished he could offer everyone. Marcus Webb attended, now officially retired but serving as the foundation's advisory board chair. Eleanor Hartman sat in the front row, having good days more frequently now, "because I finally have a reason to remember," she'd told me. Amanda Chen was there too, standing awkwardly near the back. She'd been volunteering at the foundation for 3 months, answering phones and filing paperwork. Humble work for a woman who'd once lived in a mansion. But she showed up every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. Victoria and James didn't come. Victoria was appealing her bar suspension. James was negotiating a plea deal with the IRS. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. After the ceremony, David and I walked through the old Terrytown mansion one last time. The family had finally agreed to sell it, and the foundation had purchased it at fair market value. Soon, it would become a community center. ESL classes, citizenship test preparation, legal clinics. "It's strange being here," David said, running his hand along the kitchen counter where I'd made thousands of meals. This was his home, but he never felt at home here. Not really. He felt at home in the in-between spaces, I replied, in the conversations nobody else heard, in the quiet moments of connection that his official life didn't have room for. We stood in Robert's study, where the military photograph still sat on the desk. David picked it up, studying his father's young face. 22 years old, same age I was when I started my carpentry business. He'd already witnessed corruption and made the choice to stay silent. I wonder if he knew then what it would cost him. He knew, but he also knew what speaking up would cost. Sometimes there are no good choices, David, just different kinds of sacrifice. On the desk, I noticed a letter I'd never seen before. Addressed to David, dated 2 weeks before Robert passed away. He must have left it here knowing we'd eventually find it. David's hands shook as he opened it. "David, my son, if you're reading this, Maria has told you the truth. I pray you can forgive me for the silence. I wanted to be your father openly, to teach you to play guitar, to help you with homework, to watch you graduate, but I chose your safety over my happiness, and I would make the same choice again. You are my greatest achievement, not because of your blood, but because of your character. You built yourself into a good man without me. That's a gift I could never have given you. The money is yours, but it comes with a responsibility. Use it to protect others the way I wished I could have protected everyone. Break the cycle of silence that corruption demands. Your mother believed in justice. I believed in protection. You can believe in both. Be braver than I was. All my love, Dad." David cried quietly, and I held him the way I'd held Robert's hand during his final weeks. Present, steady, bearing witness to pain that couldn't be fixed, only honored. "I forgive him," David finally said. "How could I not? He gave me everything he could, in the only way he knew how." That evening, I sat on my porch in East Austin, guitar in my lap, playing the Mexican ballads Robert had loved. The neighborhood hummed with life, children playing soccer, families sharing dinner, the sound of Spanish and English mixing in the warm air. My phone buzzed with a message from Rosa. "Father Thomas wants to do a blessing ceremony for the foundation, next Sunday after Mass. The whole parish wants to celebrate." I smiled, thinking about Robert's voice on those cassette tapes. Sometimes silence protects. Truth eventually liberates, but loyalty transcends both. He'd been right about everything except one thing. The truth hadn't destroyed his family. It had finally given them a chance to become real. 22 years of service, 46 years of secrets, and, finally, a legacy of justice that would echo through generations. Robert Chen had found his way home. Not to the mansion in Terrytown, but to the truth that sets everyone free.